Hello, my name is Lee Presser. This is my show. I speak frequently to very interesting people. Some of these conversations are so exciting, so intellectually stimulating, I thought others might like to listen in. This is the reason we started recording Conversation with Lee Presser.
Welcome to Conversation with Lee Presser. In the summer of 2007, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers announced there were design deficiencies in the levees which protect Madison, St. Clair, and Monroe counties in Illinois. The Corps worried that those deficiencies could prevent them from certifying that the levees can protect those counties against a large Mississippi River flood. FEMA, based on the Corps' findings, announced a decision to de-accredit the Metro East levee system. The reclassification of these counties as a special flood hazard area would have had a dramatic and chilling effect on economic growth. Citizens reacted by creating a special sales tax in Madison, St. Clair, and Monroe counties. This tax has created a revenue stream which has allowed them to begin the repair and modernization of the 74 miles of levees which protects the region. Unfortunately, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has not shown a sense of urgency about repairing its small stretch of the levee near the Melvin Price Lock and Dam, just south of Alton. Here to inform us about the status of the project today is Les Sterman, Chief Supervisor for Southwestern Illinois Flood Prevention District Council. Mr. Sterman, welcome to Conversation.
Happy to be here.
It's been a few months since you were here last time. What has occurred in that interim?
Well, we've continued to push forward. All of our designs need to be approved by the Corps of Engineers, which is a long and difficult process. We've gotten all of our environmental permits. You need a permit because you're going to fill in some wetlands behind the levee, so we have to create additional wetlands in other places. We needed a water quality permit from the state to assure that we're not polluting any waters of the United States. So we've been going through all of this paperwork, really, just to get to the point where we can actually build something, and I'm happy to say that we are starting to build things. We've taken bids now for three fairly major projects, totaling over $20 million. Construction is just at the very early stages at this point, and so it feels more meaningful now that we're actually building something.
Originally, I remember from long ago in the early days, I'm not even sure if you were actually there yet or maybe you were just there, they were talking like $600-700 million to do this work. What is your current budget?
It looks like we'll be building the project for $150 million or less.
Now, how do you go from 800 million or whatever it was they were banting around to where realistically you're closer to 150?
Well, we did a couple of things. First of all, the estimates that were being talked about at the time, which were $500 million and up, and 30-40 years to the construction by the Corps of Engineers, were based on restoring the levee system to its so-called authorized level, which is 52 feet plus 2 feet of freeboard on the St. Louis gauge. It's kind of a technical way of looking at it, but it's well north of a 500-year level of protection. The FEMA requirement is a 100-year level of protection. So that with that somewhat lesser level of protection, the costs are somewhat reduced. We also did a design competition and we brought in teams and actually paid them to come up with design concepts that would work within the dollars that we had, which we believed at the time and still do to be about $150 million. So we came up with some pretty good ideas from that and ultimately chose one of the teams and went forward. So we've been very cost conscious, knowing that our budget is limited.
Did I hear you say that you were building to a 100-year standard or a 500-year standard?
It's a 100-year standard. I think in most places the levee system will protect to a greater degree than that, but the FEMA standard for flood insurance is a 100-year level of protection.
Now, just so that people understand, it's not like a flood that occurs once every 100 years when they say 100-year standard. They're talking about a percentage chance, so there's like 1 in 100 chance every year that the river could flood to that level. Is that right?
That's absolutely correct. The other thing that people need to keep in mind is the FEMA standard is to protect to that level without flood fighting. In other words, without any human intervention. So, when we have a flood, you'll see pictures of people dealing with sand boils and sandbagging and things like that. None of that would be included. So actually, when you do include those measures that the Corps of Engineers undertakes in our local levee districts, there's it's a significantly greater level of protection.
Mm-hmm. And the 500-year is like 0.2%?
Yeah, 0.02, I think, or
yeah, something ridiculously small. And yet, in 93 and 95, didn't we have a 100-year flood in each
actually,
of those years?
93 was something like a 380-year flood. It depends on who you talk to statistically.
The height of the water.
Right. And the levee system in its current condition was actually provided a level of protection.
On your side of the river, it held.
On the Illinois side of the river, it held, yes.
Yeah. And
people will remember the Gummersheimer House floating away in Monroe County, for example. That actually is a levee district to the south of us. That's not, and that's only protected by what's known as an agricultural levee, which offers substantially less protection.
I remember that. As a matter of fact, in doing research for today, I went back and looked on YouTube and saw that whole event, which everybody saw live on TV on a Sunday morning. But on the Saturday morning before that, there was over in the Chesterfield Valley, where there was a catastrophic failure. Some guy was out there walking, if you remember that video or not, he was walking. The next thing you know, it's up to here, and then the helicopter came and plucked him out of the water and took him away. But there was a car dealership who had been sandbagging, and then when he was asked, well, how high did the water get? It was like 15 feet.
Yeah. Well, again, that was a levee on the Missouri River. It actually offered much less of a level of protection. Now that all has now been rebuilt to something like a 500-year level of protection. One could argue whether they should have done that, but that's what's taken place.
Well, considering that they've built tens of millions of dollars worth of structures in that same area, hopefully it will work.
Hopefully.
Otherwise, those insurance companies are in for it. So coming back to your bailiwick, your levee district, you have started some construction, but I read an article that says that there is, in the midst of your area, I don't know, is it like 7,000 feet or something that the Army Corps of Engineers is responsible for? You have no responsibility, but yet there don't seem to be in any hurry to fix their section, so that if yours is done and there's still a weak spot?
Well, yeah, this is a section that is just across the berm highway from the Mel Price Lock and Dam up in the Wood River area. When they moved the lock and dam down river a couple of miles back in the early 90s, that created a raised pool that was up against the levee. That additional pressure has created significant uncontrolled underseepage. So the river goes up, there's a pond on the other side of the berm highway that comes up with it. That's a dangerous situation. The Corps identified this situation back in 2009, attempted to actually declare it an emergency so it would give them the flexibility to move some money around to deal with it. The hierarchy within the Corps decided it was not really an emergency. So it got thrown into the regular project development process of the Corps. And since 2009, the Corps has been working on a plan to fix the problem. And just over the last 6 or 8 months, that plan was finally approved. So, it's been several years just to get a plan for something which arguably was an emergency. The Corps has not yet, because they didn't have a plan, they couldn't go to Congress and get an appropriation to fix it. They've moved a little bit of money around to spend on the design of the project. The Corps has accepted responsibility. That's the good news. They know it's their fault, and they will pay 100% of the cost of fixing it, part of the lock and dam project. The bad news is that they have to await appropriations by Congress. One could argue that that the Corps has not moved with the sense of urgency that we'd like, given the problem. We're trying to get our portions fixed by 2015, and it's clear this will not be done by then. So it could threaten our ability to get the levee system as a whole accredited by FEMA.
Now, I referenced that in the opening. Why don't you just describe what are the consequences or the punishments for not having this project completed from beginning to end?
Well, I mean, there are a number of them. Obviously, there's the public safety issue. If we can't reinforce this levee system and we get a major flood like we had in '93, that puts everybody at risk. And it's kind of a weakest link in the chain problem, where you have one segment, particularly one that's, to the northern end of the system in Wood River. So we obviously don't want that to happen. So there's
so
the public.
If this broke, water would actually go behind and would just run. It'd be a separate channel running right back there where people live and businesses are behind the current levees.
That's potentially the case, yes. So you have public safety issues. There are navigational issues on the river that could disrupt national commerce. Obviously, in the absence of a failure, you have other economic consequences, as you described in the intro. People will be required, if you have a mortgage on your home, you'll be required to buy flood insurance. It'll be very costly, because we will then be considered a flood hazard area by FEMA. We've estimated the cost.
Meaning that it's more than likely, or it's more likely than not that they would have to pay out insurance.
Correct. So, and the price tag on that, we've calculated region-wide, would be about $50 million a year. It's like a tax, if you will, on the region. And lastly, if you own a piece of property, whether it's a home or a business, and you're subject to the requirement for flood insurance, as well as the potentially increased risk of flooding, that your property value goes down. So you could see a dramatic loss of property value throughout the entire American bottom.
Mm-hmm. Okay, now I'm going to say something about the Corps of Engineers, and you may or may not want to get into this, but they sound pretty dysfunctional at this stage. President Kennedy in 1961, I believe it was 61, perhaps 62, declared that we were going to put a man safely on the moon and get him back, and within 8 years that happened, which was a huge engineering feat, because they didn't even have any of the equipment or even the knowledge of how to accomplish this task when he declared that, and yet it was done. Here we are now in the 21st century, and apparently we can't declare that there's a problem with one small segment of what the Corps owns and get that done in a realistic space of time.
Well, I think it's a problem with government generally, to be honest. We have basically suffocated ourselves under an avalanche of processes and procedures, not necessarily dictated by Congress. Congress, I think, has established in most cases sensible policies, but the bureaucracy in this case, in implementing those policies, develops a tangle of processes, procedures, regulations, guidance, there's all sorts of names for this, that eventually make it more and more difficult to do anything, because you've got to jump through so many hoops. As I mentioned, Mel Price, the lock and dam problem that we're dealing with was identified in 2009 as an emergency, and here we are in 2013, and we don't have a design yet for the fix. So
now, as an engineer, if you had a team of guys, how long would it take you and this team of guys to actually come up with a realistic, workable plan?
Well, in the absence of, if you had the money that you needed, and in the absence of all of the other kinds of suffocating bureaucratic requirements, it would be within months, I would think.
Months?
Yeah.
And you're talking 4 years. Now, I mean, it caught my attention when you were talking about the various permits that you have to go through in order to you know, like you said, you have to establish some wetlands somewhere else because, well, no, I'm not going to ask you that because I don't want to.
I don't have a problem with those requirements. And in fact, we actually got through them with reasonable predictability and certainty. That kind of regulatory regime is a pretty well-worn path. Where we got into trouble more than anything else was in, you know, sort of these ambiguous technical reviews where, you know, any engineer in the room can decide he doesn't like something and it, you know, basically throws the process into a tailspin. And all of the environmental reviews got basically done locally. So we didn't have to go to the division in Vicksburg, Mississippi, or headquarters in Washington, D.C. So you didn't have these multiple layers. We were always dealing with the people directly who were enforcing the regulations. So that, I didn't have a problem with that. And the policies on that make sense. As far, you know, you shouldn't be able to pollute the waters of the United States.
Right.
You shouldn't be able to destroy wetlands and not replace them. So I don't have a problem with that.
Okay. But you do have a problem with the process.
Yeah, with the overall process, is you know, as you indicated in your analogy with getting a man to the moon, we should be able to identify serious problems and, as a country, as government, address them in some sort of reasonable and urgent way. And I think that's why people lose faith in the government. It's not because the policies are wrong. It's because we have invested in a massive bureaucracy, a very risk-averse bureaucracy. So they try to cover every possible imaginable risk 10 times over. And that takes a lot of time and a lot of money.
I guess Elmhurst, there's a dam that's being built or lock system that has been going on for something like...
Oh, the Olmsted Lock and Dam?
Olmsted, yes. Olmsted, yeah. But it's been going on for like 25 years or something now. It started out, it was going to be about 700 million. Now they're up to 3.1 million and... Billion, I'm sorry, and billion.
Yeah, pretty
nowadays.
soon you have real money, right?
That's right. But they even are to the point now where, we might not actually get it done after spending all that money. That's why I was asking about your feeling about the dysfunctional nature of the Army Corps.
Well, I think it has to do with leadership. It has to do with people making decisions, taking risks. You know, the kinds of things that, you know, you and I do every day in our lives, but it's very difficult for a bureaucracy to do.
Apparently, but you say political. Is this political within the Corps, or is this political, you know, what they call above their pay grade?
You know, I think it's just, you know, I think it's just the bureaucracy. I mean, it's when you try to get anything done, you've got an army of lawyers who will tell you 50 reasons why you can't do it. You have no bureaucrat wants to put their, you know, their reputation at risk by making a decision.
Then get out of there. Get out of the way.
Well, it just doesn't work that way. It really doesn't. You know, until you've actually worked in it and experienced it, it's hard even to explain to the average citizen.
Well, I'll tell you. I mean, if that one small stretch that you were talking about by the Mel Price were to fail, say next year or the year after that, there'd be some explaining to have to be done.
There would be, but you know, I can guarantee you the Corps will do whatever it takes to keep that from happening. I mean, they understand the consequences.
You mean the braking?
Yeah.
Well, it's a little late when the water starts coming up, isn't it?
Well, I mean, I think they have a variety of things that they would, measures that they would undertake, you know, for dramatic, whatever, to make sure that it won't happen. Obviously, the Corps was pretty badly stung by the events in New Orleans of a few years ago, and they don't want that to happen again.
So, before the show, we were talking a little bit about your area, that your organization is like an overarching organization that runs basically from the north of Madison County down to Monroe. My question is, there seems to be some subgroups in there. I guess they pre-existed your organization. How does that work?
The way the levee system in general is managed is by a series of local levee districts. They're essentially units of local government. They've been around for a long, long time. Some of them actually predate the modern levee system. And they've done a reasonable job over the years of maintaining the levees, keeping the grass mowed, repairing pump stations, doing the kinds of things that are necessary for day-to-day maintenance. They really were not set up for long-term major capital improvements. That's the problem.
So they don't actually maintain the levee itself. Just
They do.
The artifacts around it.
Well, they maintain it to the degree that it's not a significant capital expenditure. So if you get a low spot in the levee, they'll fill it. If there's a drain under the levee that's collapsing, they might replace it. But they have limited fiscal ability to do anything major.
And they're getting their money from property taxes?
Typically from property taxes or basically special assessments. It kind of depends upon how they were set up. And they only tax the property that's protected by the levee system. So, in our case, our tax is levied in the entire 3-county area, Madison, St. Clair, and Monroe. The thinking being, obviously, what goes on in the American Bottoms affects everybody. Just because, you may not live there, but you may work at a business there. There's 55,000 jobs there, so it's a big portion of our region's economy. So if that failed, everybody would be affected. So we have a much broader funding base, and it's a small sales tax. So we collect about $11 million a year that we're borrowing against to fund the project. But the local levee districts over time have actually done a pretty remarkable job. A lot of them using volunteers, not significantly funded, and I think they've done remarkably well given the circumstances. Now, one could argue, is this the way we would have set this thing up if we were starting from scratch? Probably not, but that's the way a lot of local government is.
Well, yeah, I mean, what you're saying is that this grew up organically along the way, starting back probably in the 19th century?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then the current levees, they were built when? 20s, 30s, 40s?
They were authorized mainly in the 1930s, 1940s, some of them. And so they were built during that period of time, 40s, 50s.
Why? There is in the literature a lot of discussion about why levees. Why do we do this? Why do we decide that we're going to try and fight nature? What's your feeling about this?
Well, I think that's a tough question, and I think the answer is not a simple one. Clearly, going back many, many years, people settled along rivers for a variety of reasons. It was a transportation corridor. It was a source of water. It was all those kinds of things. So we created all these cities along rivers. Businesses settled there because they utilized the transportation facility, the railroads, the roads, the river all came together. And so it's a big source of our economy. So in those cases where kind of history has made us like we are, I think we have an obligation to fulfill the promise of flood protection and do the best we can, protect those areas. Other areas, I am not an advocate of building levees in places where there are none. I think one could really question building the 500-year levee along the Missouri River in Chesterfield so we could build a big shopping center. That to me is not a wise use of public money.
You're asking for trouble, in other words.
Well, yeah, and you are in fact creating problems downriver. You're restricting the channel. I mean, all the things that you read about. So I guess the shorter answer to that question is I think we have an obligation to protect the areas that throughout history we made a promise to protect. I don't think we should be building new levees to protect existing areas that have been unprotected.
There are a handful of people, and I just say a handful, who say, let's tear the levees down. and just let the river go where it goes. How do you answer people like that?
Well, I mean, as a practical matter, how do you do that? I mean, how do you take a couple of 100,000 people, many of them poor or middle class, and tell them their property has no value? They have to get out and move. It just doesn't make sense. Businesses that rely on the river. I mean, we have huge businesses, refineries, steel mills that rely on the river for their business. How do we do away with that? That's a big part of our economy. The American bottom is kind of the heart of the industrial economy in our region.
Here in the last 2 minutes or so, what would you like to say to people about their concerns that their insurance is going to go up and your abilities or your organization's ability to prevent that?
All I can say is we are doing everything humanly possible with a great sense of urgency to make sure that doesn't happen. I think our track record over the last few years, I mean, we came from nothing. We were formed essentially in 2009, with a brand new board, a brand new staff member who you're looking at, and we've accomplished a lot during that period of time. I lay awake nights worrying whether we're going to be done by 2015, but we're doing everything we can to make sure that happens. We've conquered a lot of obstacles, but we still have some challenges ahead.
We did have some high water in June of 2013. Was that a challenge?
No, it really was little or no impact on our side of the river. I kept in touch with all the levee districts to make sure that they were in good shape, and nobody reported any significant problems.
So it would take some really significant rains at some future date to really worry you? Significant rains which we haven't seen in a while.
Well, yeah, rain here or upriver. There are a variety of things that could happen, and I can assure you that they will happen someday. There's no question that, even the events earlier this year, which almost started to mirror 1993 for a while, had we had a couple more days of rain in the wrong places, we could have had a significant event here, and it will happen. There's no question about it.
Hence the 1% chance every year to make that happen. Well, good update. Thank you very much for coming and spending some time with us. I do appreciate your being here.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
We love to have people come and talk about infrastructure issues, because most people just think that it's just there, it's always going to be there, and it's always going to work.
Yeah, we take infrastructure for granted, and it's taken a lot of work to get us to this point.
Thanks for, truly, thanks for investing your time and energy. Somebody else might have just done kind of a half-cocked job, but I know you're working hard. Thanks again.
Oh, thanks for saying that.
I've been speaking with Les Sterman. He's been working on this levee district problem in Illinois for a long time. This show is going to be uploaded to YouTube, so if you want to show it to somebody else, go to YouTube. Thank you very much. Goodbye.